Yeah, it's my pleasure again to welcome you all tonight. I'm Amelie Schiele. I'm curator of public practice at Foam. And yeah, we are really happy to have you for this second part of the talk, Navigating the Media Industry. This all is part of a larger program on the topic of working on assignments. In this event program, we aim to provide an insight into into the dynamics of the media industry and the question on how to maneuver it. And while in the past, in this first talk, we spoke with representatives of the industry, tonight we have a special focus. It's going to be the photographer's perspective. Photographers are positioned as intermediates between commercial partners and their audiences. And so many photographers and young talents are asked to collaborate with commercial partners because they have a certain cachet, a particular aesthetic or a unique access or an understanding of a particular community. And so tonight we have artists with us and moderator Aaron Schuman to just look more closely at some of the questions and experiences, questions these artists asked themselves and experiences they had. And yeah, I will already just hand it over to Aaron. He's a photographer himself, a writer and an educator, and has been doing a wonderful job in leading us through this large topic. So Aaron, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks for joining everyone. Like Amelie said, this is a conversation that probably could go on for days, if not weeks. So we're going to try to squeeze as much stuff in as we can, but obviously there's going to be a lot to talk about. And I do want to keep the conversation reasonably informal and conversational, so that we can kind of, talk to one another and discuss it in detail, but without feeling too kind of formalized or stressed. So the way that we'll probably go is myself and the artist will speak for about an hour. Around the topic with various questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And we've got somebody who's kind of going to be feeding some of those through to us for the end. And then for the last kind of 20 minutes to a half hour, hopefully we'll have enough time to do some audience questions as well. So that's kind of the plan. And I want to say thank you to the three artists that are joining us today, all incredibly accomplished, amazing photographers and yeah, contributors to this medium in their own right. And I'm really excited to talk to all of you about this. So I think the way we're going to get started is rather than me having reading a bio to your work can be found on the Foam website as well as a million other outlets. So I think people can do their own research and discover the kind of work that you're doing if they haven't done already. But what I'd like to do is just introduce each one of you and ask that maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experiences early on in your career. Firstly, in terms of when you were starting out as a photographer, did you have aspirations to work on assignment and commission? Did you imagine, as a teenager or whenever you started making pictures that one day I'd like to shoot for magazines or advertisements or charities, whatever it might be? And also what your experience was kind of moving from establishing yourself through your own personal work to then starting to gain kind of commissions, that early transition kind of moving from self-directed practice to one that was based on commissions or assignments. So I'm going to throw that question firstly to Miriam, sorry. Yeah, so Miriam Boulos, Lebanese photographer. You've exhibited your work internationally, published in lots of different platforms, Time, Vogue, Foam, Aperture, Dazed and Confused, and are a Foam talent this year as well. So yeah, maybe you could start us off with a little bit about that.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having us and thank you for both introductions. Okay, so yes, I'm Miriam Boulos. I started photography when I was 16. I met a girl at school who had this sophisticated camera, and I was like, I want the same. And my parents were like, nope. And my mom told me that I had to develop my eye, like develop my gaze before getting this kind of expensive camera. And since then, photography has been for me the most obvious and fluid thing in my life. As you can see, I'm not sure, I think you can see this, I'm a very shy person and I am fascinated by people. So yes, photography is the perfect medium for me. And from my first pictures, my approach has been a mix of documentary and diary. I would photograph my friends and my family a lot. I was a bit annoying. And I would also get lost in Beirut streets after school with a small camera and meet and photograph strangers. And photography quickly became for me a way of defying and resisting the system we live in. I always use a direct flash. From one side, it's a way of getting closer to reality because I have this obsession of feeling things concretely. I don't know if this makes sense, but it does for me. And from another side, with my direct flash, I literally put the light on things that are oppressed or normalized when they shouldn't be. Um, I studied photography at l'Académie libanaise des Beaux-Arts in Lebanon, and I started working in Lebanon during my first year of university. I photographed concerts, events, weddings, fashion shoots, behind the scenes, etc. And actually, this allowed me to work in parallel on my personal projects. So my first personal project was, I worked on it when I was 21 as a young woman discovering the patriarchal capitalist society I lived in, I mean, we all live in, and questioning my place in it. And back then, I only took pictures at night. For me, it was the moment where Beirut's social map would suddenly appear. So this project in particular was published and exhibited internationally. And this is how I started to be hired for commissions outside of Lebanon too. I can tell you more about like my first time working with a,
Yeah.
or should I stop? I don't know.
No. Yeah. So give us, just a sense of what was that first experience of when, somebody else had asked you to make photographs based on the work that you'd made on your own, and was it difficult for you to translate what you did on your own back to something that might satisfy or meet the expectations of somebody else?
So actually, the first time I worked for an international media was around 2017. I got a call. Usually, I don't answer my phone because it makes me anxious, but this time I did, not sure why. But it was Samil Qasim, an amazing photo editor at Libération. And he told me that he saw my work online and he would like to try and work with me. And it was a piece called Carnet de Beyrouth. So the commission consisted in a mix of portraits and places to visit in Beirut. And I actually love working for clients on commissions because it's like having one foot in reality and one foot in my own world.
Mm.
And I also love when someone gives me a context in which I just have to create images. Of course, it's important to understand, it's important for me to understand what the clients want to be able to create the images as if I'm doing them for myself and to kind of get lost in this context. But yes, it went great. And I actually ended up starting a new photo series based on this first commission.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. That's something we can dig into a little bit later. That's great. So maybe we should move on to Rahim. Rahim Fortune is an American photographer whose work focuses on culture, geography, self-expression. He published a book last year, I Can't Stand to See You Cry, which brought him great acclaim and was shortlisted for the Paris Photo Aperture Book Award, as well as he recently was awarded the Aural Discovery Award as well. So everything going great so far. I'm curious, Rahim, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience kind of, starting out. Did you always want to work as a photographer? Did you imagine that would entail commissions and assignments? And maybe tell us a little bit about how you moved from your personal work into some of the commissions you've been doing.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to say hello to everybody. Great to be connected with you from all these different corners of the world. But yes, So prior to being a photographer, which I'm a self-taught photographer, I didn't attend any formal training or schooling for art photography. So a lot of what I learned was just through, family archives and photographs that I gravitated towards because in kind of beginning to really pick apart what it was that was drawing me to certain archival images as well. My family's background is Black and Native American. So my mother is Native. I grew up in Oklahoma, a part of a tribe called the Chickasaw Nation. So growing up in this kind of post-colonial American South, with the racialized identity, there were so many question marks and trauma which veiled histories. And so photographs really allowed to, as some visual reference, to understand when your kind of reality wasn't represented in the day-to-day life. When you walk out, it's not like there's overtly a lot of things to relate to as a Black Native person. So it was a bit of, unraveling that. But as far as, so I guess with the beginning, after the passing of my mother, she passed away in 2007. I would return maybe 11 years later with a camera and began kind of investigating Oklahoma, which was where I grew up. That would be my first body of work in kind of thinking about quieter photographs, more poetic sequences of describing a place that don't need a kind of all the poverty and, portraiture that is kind of traditional within documentary canon. So that was kind of the beginning for me, was photographing in Oklahoma. I was very inspired by Summer Nights Walking, which is a book by Robert Adams. And just the slow meditation on place was very inspiring to me.
Can I just ask,
Later.
when you did that project, did you kind of, when you were going back to Oklahoma to make that work, did you have an audience in mind? Were you thinking, I really want to put this out into the world? Or was it more of a kind of personal journey for you to kind of negotiate that place in your relationship to it?
Yeah, I mean, I could give some kind of intellectualized answer, but it was really just like a very naive approach. It definitely wasn't thinking about audience in the realms of like sharing it on social media, because I've always been pretty cognizant of the fact that social media responds to attractive people, celebrity, sexualized image. It just does not respond to like quiet landscapes. So it's like I wasn't really trying to put it on social media, and I still feel like if I was to share it today, like people might not get it. And that's something I always talk to younger photographers about. It's like, yeah, social media is not really the place for a lot of work, a lot of good work to live. It is the algorithm that responds to a very particular type of imagery. And I see it even now, in the way that people respond to certain images over other ones. So that would be my answer, would be not really thinking about audience, not really thinking about too much, just looking at images that made me feel things and working to form my own, my own version of that.
Yeah.
Being that I was self-taught, it was not like I had some form or rigor or mentor, even any level of like formal critique. It was just go out with the camera, what inspires you. And so it was like, yeah, I always say I kind of learned everything in reverse. Like I didn't learn what an edition was, like how you an edition a print, until I was signed with a gallery. So they were like, oh, and so all of it is very yeah, not I try to like have a very just like humble approach to it. And that to me is, making work about everyday people. It's important for me to maintain that kind of approach to it and not have it be too intellectual.
Okay,
it's just
great.
about connecting with people. But anyway, so I don't want to go, I can get caught on a tangent. But I guess leading up to I Can't Stand to See You Cry, my father would be diagnosed with ALS in maybe 2018. And so I began making photographs of him. I had always been making photographs in Texas where he lived. So I kind of grew up between Texas and Oklahoma. And the photographs that I made up until when he passed away would culminate into I Can't Stand to See You Cry, which is maybe about 6 years worth of work. And, also we need to talk about America in 2020 and the protests, the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and how that caused a call for, art, art from people who were maybe looking a little bit more critically into these subjects. And, you know, also maybe things like tokenization, as well as reactionary photographic institutions, all of the above, which I would love to get into, kind of the late response of the photo industry to the fact that we've seen such kind of homogenous, non-diverse batches of artists. Like, you know, how many more Avedon shows do we need? How many more, you know, and these are still the highest grossing photographers. So I've always really been interested in pushing up against just like the industry norms. And yeah, I guess that was really my start. It's kind of hard to just singly like track it in that way, but more or
So
less that's my start.
yes. So how? So I mean, so with that kind of approach, how do you kind of negotiate, or how have you translated that approach to a situation where you're being asked to go on assignment or commissioned for a particular brand or, you know, magazine?
Yeah, well, so my first kind of major assignment was for a New York Times Magazine. It was a cover story about COVID-19. And so I spent 5 days in the ICUs in Houston, photographing the initial COVID outbreak in Houston, which became the kind of like the third epicenter. I think it was like Italy, New York, and then Texas got it really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first initial assignment. And it was actually really odd because while my father, I was caregiving for him, I was also photographing in the ICU. So there was this weird overlap of like public health and illness that I was surrounded by.
Yeah.
And so even from the very instance, I don't think I could have photographed the sick people in the hospitals without having had caregive for my father. So I always think of like my personal experience as like the most valuable thing I have. And so that's kind of, you know, started, you know, later I would go on to photograph places like Rosewood, Florida, Greenwood, Oklahoma, places that were kind of systematically burnt during what was known as the Red Summer, which was like a heightened period of Klan violence in America. And all of these stories are like very close to my close to my heart and close to home. Especially growing up in Texas, where so much of the same violence was enacted, as well as so many of these stories go untold. So I try to not really take on an assignment that I don't feel any connection to. But, you know, I try to, yeah, not just, you know, take everything and be grateful. I think that what I got into photography for was being critical. And I try to keep that now that I'm getting assignments and my work has gained like some form of attention. I don't want to just take that as like being okay now. Like I think it's important to continue to be critical and continue to ask the same questions that you were asking that inspired me to get into this.
Great.
But,
yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Right. And I also want to move on to the third speaker. So Bieke de Porter, a Belgian photographer who was nominated to Magnum in 2012 and joined as a full member in 2016. There's a whole list of, I won't go through the numerous prizes and awards she's done. She's published several critically acclaimed books, including Agatha, As It May Be, I'm About to Call It a Day, and many, many more. So yeah, Bieke, maybe you could tell us a little bit, you know, having done this now for, you know, more than a decade, maybe you could tell us a little bit.
I'm getting old.
Tell us a little bit about your journey from, you know, where you started and why you started making pictures and how that translated into a kind of a career, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Why I started making pictures, I don't have an answer to that. I don't have a spectacular story, to be honest. I think maybe it's like, I think most things I'm doing, it starts from a sort of like need or urgency. And maybe it's good to say that I didn't grow up in artistic world. I never went to a museum before I was 18. So like choosing photography was really a big surprise to my environment, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then maybe to get to assignments, like, so I studied photography in Belgium, in Ghent, and without knowing a lot about photography. So I didn't know what Magnum was when I started to study. Like, you know, I just went out and photographed, and then like did the assignments my professors gave me, and like I really felt I wanted to connect with people. and I felt very uncomfortable taking pictures on the streets. So because I felt like I was stealing pictures of people, and I wasn't asking for their consent, and it felt very strange in a way. And when Umenia, like the project I was doing in Russia, which was also my first book I published, was my graduating project. And that's for the first time I felt comfortable with photography. Because I asked people on the street if I could spend the night in their homes. First, I actually did it because I didn't have money. It was not like this big concept I invented, but I didn't have money and I needed to have a place. I actually thought I was doing a project about the Trans-Siberian train. But that's how I ended up into people's homes, and then people were very open, and they, even though I couldn't speak the language, they were very open and I could photograph. I showed them I was a photographer. So it was like, I was very surprised that in a very short moment, I could get very close to them. And then I realized actually what I liked about photography, and it's this connection, I guess, with people. And then like this whole struggle with the medium fell away that I had when I was studying, kind of fell away. And and I think now the relationships I have with the people I photographed are really defining my work. But I feel like in the beginning, for me, it was very important to be first as a person with the people I photograph, and second as a photographer. And in the beginning that was possible, but I think the longer I became a professional photographer, the more I was aware about what I was doing, and the more I was aware about the audience, the more difficult it was to be there as a person first. And I think that was really kind of a conflict in my mind. And I think that's when my whole practice was changing as well, like more questioning what I was doing, more questioning like, do I use people for my images, and is that okay? And how can I deal with this without like, I didn't want to ignore this question. So I think my work started to like reflect on this, and I started to see people as actors in one book. And I really tried to like have this conversation with the people I photograph. And then to come to assignments, I think this is also, I have the same conflict when I'm doing assignments. Like in the beginning, I didn't think about that so much. But then when I start to reflect on the medium and on how I use people, or how we use people as photographers, and how we use images, and the more I'm aware of this, the more I find it difficult to do assignments as well.
Yeah.
And then especially like, just to give some, like maybe an example of, like in the beginning, I did some assignments for NGOs and charities, but then like people want me to photograph the way I photograph in my personal work. They want me to like show intimate images, but then you can only do this if I can't fake a relationship. So, and I know I'm doing something for an assignment. So is that relationship like real? And then I know I have to have a result. So is it like, okay, I don't know. It's sometimes it's a really difficult thing in my mind.
Yeah. I think that's go ahead. No, I think that's an interesting point to kind of take on with all of you. Actually, is I was curious why you think like photography editors, commissioners, advertising agencies, agents, all these people, galleries, but more specifically in relationship to assignments and commissions. Why do you think they're coming to you specifically? I mean, Bika, you're talking about they were expecting some sort of intimacy, or you to build this kind of intimate, very personal relationship based on your personal work. But I was curious if I could throw that question to Miriam first, and then maybe Rahim, and just get a sense of, how do you feel like the industry is seeing you? How do you cultivate that? How do you avoid getting pigeonholed or kind of, categorized as one thing? Yeah.
I have many things to say concerning this and concerning what PK was saying also, because I went through the same thing, but on a different rhythm. At first, as I was saying, I was taking a lot of pictures in the streets, and for a few years, for yeah, at least like 3, 4 years, something like this. And I used to kind of, um, I don't know how to say this, to stick my own vision on the bodies and the faces of people in my images. And then I, it's slowly with time and with mainly with the revolution also that I got more conscious of this. And then not only more conscious, like I got suddenly very conscious of this and very obsessed with this. I realized how much like we have as photographers power, but not only power. Of course, power can be abusive, and this is very like it's a very thin line, and it's so important to be conscious of this. But it's a power also in a good way, like because once you realize that this, once we realize that this object, this camera, this medium is kind of a privilege, there is so many things to do with it, and particularly through commissions and medias actually, because it's a way kind of amplifying our voices and to kind of um, how to say this, to kind of fight from the belly of the beast in a way, like from yeah, because I think that some many times, sorry, I'm talking a lot, I'm just gonna say this.
That's why
I
you're
think
here.
that
It's fine. Go for it.
I think that many times like medias are a representation of the system like we live in and the world we live in, and I think that it's important to have nuanced people like us to be kind of a mediator between the stories to tell and the people we meet and how these stories and like kind of the platforms on which these stories are told.
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I
Yeah.
answering the question?
You know, I mean, that was really, I mean, that's really fascinating. I think that, you know, it's a really good point in terms of that, you know, fighting from the belly of the beast and using the mass media as a form of kind of amplifying your voice, because I think, you know, it's very difficult to reach people. You know, what's really reassuring is that everybody that's spoken so far takes that responsibility incredibly seriously. It's not just a simply kind of, I get a paid gig, I do what they tell me kind of thing, which I think is a really important point that all of you are making, and that you take that, you bear that responsibility. You don't take it lightly. You really take it seriously. Raheem, did you want to speak to that point in any way, either in terms of what is your experience of the industry's expectations when they come to you? You know, why do you think they're calling you rather than, you know, the other thousands of photographers that are available to them, and how do you negotiate that kind of their expectations of what they think they're going to get from you, from based, you know, and also what you want to deliver and based on your own ethics and approach and strategies as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've done kind of a string of assignments between publications, different publications like National Geographics and Time Magazine and New York Times Magazine and The Atlantic, who are all kind of like in a way like the powerhouse of like print media currently. You know, it's like they're the big, at least here in the States. You know, I
Yeah.
know there are others abroad, but those are kind of like the big ones here. You know. And then you go into smaller ones like ProPublica. So those are like very journalistic, but then you also have more like pop culture things that I'll do. So I'll work on album packages for major record labels, or I'll work on celebrity or artist portraits. And so it's like a different, they're all varying. They're all varying in kind of entry points into, like you said, mass media. So with the journalistic assignments, I really try to only take things on that, one, are like episodic. Like I don't like to do a 1 day story. Like that's just not something that is like interesting to me, because especially within making photos in my personal practice, it's like I need a lot of space to try things and to fail. and you don't really have that ability. Like when you're working as a photographer, it really feels like if you mess up on an assignment that it's like done for you. Like, and that's kind of like the environment that is created because the editors are typically like high turnover rate. They might be a whole new team. And so it just, especially within corporate spaces, there's so much fear of losing your job that it often comes down on the photographer as well. Like you'll inherit some of that pressure. And so I typically don't like to, work in that setting at all. But yeah, I think that there was a big assignment that I've got early on, and I do apologize for any sound that comes in. I got an assignment and I just kind of was thinking overtly like, oh, what does this magazine look like? What is their branding? What are they expecting? And I know that whenever like my agent sent in the photos, he said that the editor's response was no surprises here. And like that really kind of hit me a little bit. Like it really was kind of painful to hear that. And I essentially was playing it too safe. And so ever since then, I really approached assignments the same way that I would approach a personal project. And so with that approach, you can't just take on every assignment because it's not really feasible. And also assignments don't make any money. Like that's also like assignment photography is like so on the downcline, is like, a couple $100s a day. So it's a really difficult world to navigate. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my approach. Like I would typically, like if it was a perfect world, I don't think I would work for people. I think I just did it to help gain what I needed to. But for me, I just don't find it like actually in line with how I make photographs and how I think about them. And sometimes I like to be able to sit on them for years. And I think that with an assignment, you're kind of forced to come away with like 15 strong images in a 1 week span. And that's just but I also think that there is a strength of being able to do that that's important to learn, and not to make an excuse, and to actually figure out how to go into this situation and come out with a photograph of value that is beneficial for your personal practice. But I think those are kind of the various points that I engage with it, is like knowing what it is and being passionate. And also the last thing I'll say is with those assignments I spoke of, they all have to deal with a similar subject matter. So I almost think of them as their own body of work.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I think I'm really interested in that idea also, because I know a lot of the people that are tuning in for this are photographers themselves, and I know a lot of photographers, especially early on in their careers, really struggle with how do you first of all, how do you get assignments, but also how do you say no to assignments? Because I think all three of you have kind of mentioned at some point, you've turned something down, or you try to avoid these types of assignments, or you ask the editors if you can kind of, change it or extend it or make it work more towards what you do. And I think that takes a huge amount of kind of, courage to a certain extent, especially early on in one's career. So yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. How do you kind of determine what type of assignments you take, and how do you politely decline, or maybe not so politely decline, assignments that you feel are inappropriate or not something that's worth pursuing yourself? Maybe you could chime in on that.
Yeah, maybe I can say that when I just graduated, my work on like Umenia got some attention, and I could I could work for a newspaper, and like I could do assignments. But then I think I made an important choice in my life to work, to do another job. And I really didn't do any photography job for a while because I didn't want to lose my energy for my personal work. And I kind of felt, if I'm doing things I don't really want to do, it's not going to be good because I don't have that much energy, So I decided I did all kinds of jobs actually for a very long time. Also, when I was working at Magnum, that were non-photography related, because I wanted to be fresh and have energy for a lot of projects that were asking for a lot of energy. So that was, I think, a good thing I chose. I think for everyone it's different. But then, of course, more and more interesting assignments came, and I started to do them. Also because, it was also a nicer way to earn money than working as a waiter and working in a factory and doing those things. Wait, I lost your question. Oh, I think it's not difficult to say no to assignments that I think are ethically not okay. That's very easy for me. I'm just not doing them. Like, yeah. So
do you have
that's
any?
not.
Are there any examples where somebody's come to you with something like that? Not, you don't have to name names or anything, but I mean, like a type of assignment that might have come to you that you're just like, this is not, this is not a.
If it's a company that you can't support, or if it's coming from a country that you can't like support or whatever, then I don't think, even like, for example, you have those awards that I also like declined because I can't stand behind. So this is like, for me, that's not that difficult. But it's more difficult if there's something, you have to have energy for your own work. But then, and I often put like those months in my schedule that I think should stay empty, because like this 1 month I'm going to America and I'm going to work on this personal project. But if there's then coming an assignments and that is like interesting or earns a lot of money, and then you can do your personal work like for a longer time, that's really difficult to decline. And I think we still have to do this, because otherwise you never come to our own personal work. And that's like the difficult balance to do. And of course, some assignments are interesting as well, because then, you can do another assignment because you kind of want to enter a certain world. Let's say, like, I would love to do some more fashion. Actually, I kind of surprisingly like it. So if there's like something like this coming in, then maybe I should do it, because then maybe other people will see that I'm also able to do those things. So it's like this constant balance of
Yeah, I mean, Miriam, you mentioned that some assignment work kind of has influenced or maybe sparked some ideas in your own personal practice as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, rather than, because it's easy. Yeah, I mean, we don't want to harp on about the negative aspects of assignment work all the time, but there are positive ones, like Vika just said, that you can't, not apart from the money, maybe there's some creative energy that you can kind of pull from that kind of work as well. Do you have any experiences like that?
Actually, the thing that one of my solutions when I work on commissions has been, surprisingly, it has been words. For example, when I work on something and I feel like it's too journalistic or something like this, I have personal conversations with the people I photograph, and I write down what speaks to me personally, and I include it in the commission. And for me, it's a way of like breaking the more binary, like photographer journalist approach and classical approach, and having something more like an interactive encounter with the people I'm photographing. So from one side, this is a way of making the commissions like how do you say this in English, as I want to present them, as I enjoy them. And also, as Rahim was saying before, what I love, like I love when this happens, when I get commissioned for a job to tell a story that is kind of part of a bigger and ongoing project I am working on. For me, this is a way of working on what I want to explore, and at the same time having quite a different approach on what I am working on, because I am collaborating with editors, etc. And what can I say other than this? I think
that's great.
It's good stuff about commissions.
Yeah, Rahim, you mentioned it earlier, how you've been able to kind of transform some commissions or assignments that came your way into something that was more meaningful to your own practice. Do you have any particular examples you could talk about?
Yeah, so during 2020, whenever the US broke into like kind of civil unrest, a major protest across the country for racial injustice and police brutality, living through it, I mean, it was a very intense. I was in Austin, which is where my father was living, and he was, terminally ill at the time. there was like people were all in their house. So once those protests started, it got very nasty as far as like photographers being called to action to go like document the protest. And it was very, very irresponsible. You know, they were sending photographers into these protests, and they were just making all of these photographs that said literally nothing about the actual problem at hand. And so I chose to make a series of photographs that were run by Rolling Stone, and a lot of those photographs ended up in my book and exhibition. And so, like the photograph of the young man with the tattoo of Texas, and it's split down the middle by stitches. This was a young man who was shot during a protest by a non-lethal round and nearly lost his arm. So that photograph became so synonymous with the book and with that project, but that was initially made on an assignment. So I guess it's also important to know about dual rights, know if you actually have dual rights of the image, because you never really know, especially for like the type of work I do, like the sequence, that might be a photo of a puddle I made that like ends up in the sequence. Like it just, you never know what photograph. It's not always just like the kind of home run portrait that's going to be of value. You might make a photograph that you need that quiet moment. And so that's something that I think that is important to like properly catalog and archive assignments, because even if it doesn't run for the assignment, it can recontextualize itself in some other form or way. So yeah, I think that that's kind of how, and like I said, also thinking about that body of work, like I think about my celebrity portraits as being one body of work. And, you know, someone like Peter Hujar, who I really, you know, admire, his work of like famous subjects, they're so intimate, and there's no like kind of like iconography. There's like something getting at something deeper. So if celebrity portraits was one project, the journalism projects that are about eminent domain or wrongful convictions, or you know, towns, like I said, that were burnt during the Red Summer, all of those being another body of work. So also even stylistically, how you approach them, kind of merging them. And also for me, keeping that a little bit separate from my personal practice, which is like, for me, I'm very much into like, you know, dark room and traditional silver printing, but I don't really offer that to magazines. Like if you commission me, I'm probably going to shoot like color. I'm not going to like give you my print style for your magazine.
Right.
And that's a way that I kind of keep those separately. Like I wouldn't really treat like, you know, I wouldn't treat an assignment exactly how I would treat my personal work, because I need that visual language to remain precious, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I wanted to touch on a little bit. I mean, this conversation's coming off the back of an exhibition at Foam around Magnum, and kind of working at Magnum on assignment. And I don't really want to make the conversation about Magnum specifically, but all three of you are with agencies of one sort or another. Bika, you've been with Magnum for a while. Miriam, you joined Magnum about 9 months ago. Raheem, you have an agent, you know, a commercial agent, as well as having worked at Magnum and with Magnum and that sort of thing. So I'm just curious in terms, because a lot of you, you know, a lot of what all of you are saying is how important and pretty much how central your personal work is to your practice, and commercial work is something that can help facilitate that and maybe influence that. But I'm interested in your experience. A lot of photographers feel a pressure to get an agent in order to get work, if you know what I mean. And I'm curious what your relationship is with that kind of, you know, a middleman in that sense, but also, yeah, I mean, what did you imagine? What did you expect would happen by joining an agency, or by kind of courting an agency? And why do that when you also are kind of a little bit resistant to that commercial sphere? Is it somebody to protect you or help you, or do you feel any pressures coming from the agencies themselves? I don't know. I'll turn that to Bika to start with.
Well, I think Magnum maybe is a bit different because the photographers become the owners of the agency. So we kind of also, I mean, I don't know if every photographer feels the same, but responsible for the well-being of Magnum. So Also financially, of course, if we do assignments, part of the assignment, also to other agents, I think, of course, but part of the assignment, like the percentage goes to Magnum. So, and we also know Magnum needs to survive, and it's not surviving on our personal work. So it is surviving on this work. So in this sense, I kind of feel pressure to not only do my personal work, and also because clients would ask specifically for photographers. Sometimes, of course, the staff is also pitching a few of the photographers, and then the client is choosing who they want, but also clients it's sometimes going the other way around. So then, yeah, I feel like I have some responsibility towards the agency as well. But then again, if it's something that I'm not behind, I don't find it so difficult to decline. So it's like this balance you have to find. I never, like when I joined Magnum, I never had an expectation. Like
Okay.
I also really never thought about joining Magnum. Like it was not this big goal. I wanted to join an agency, and I was like as young as Miriam. I don't know how old you are, Miriam. How old are you?
I'm 30. I think you were younger.
24, 25 I was, yeah. But so I didn't really have a life before. So it's a bit difficult to compare, but it is very helpful to have an agent that can do the negotiation as well. And you can share your doubts about like if you like should do it or not. And I mean, I'm very thankful for the people working in Magnum and working with us to be able to like do so much effort for us to as an in-between person, and to try to find, like as Miriam said, like to also try to find assignments that we can use for a personal work. And that's, I know it's a privilege, you know, I know how, like I'm very thankful that like we are in this position, and I know that it's difficult for like emerging photographers to find jobs. So it's like maybe photographers who are listening here can be frustrating, you know, hearing us talking. We all have agents, and then, but I guess the question is like, how do we get assignments if we don't have an agent as well? Like this is like a very difficult thing that we need to be careful about, maybe to talk about as well.
Yeah. Great. Miriam?
Oh, I'm just nodding.
But, oh, okay.
But because it's a good point, and actually, when you contacted me for this conversation, I asked myself like, how did I concretely started working as a photographer? And my like I don't think this is an advice, but it's just like how it happened with me. I'm so obsessed with images that I used to take a lot of pictures, and I'm not the kind of person who's just gonna hide them in the drawer. I would be like, I take pictures, I go home, I work on them, I post them online wherever, Facebook, Instagram, etc. And I think that personally this is how, because I was personally obsessed with images, so like it got me exposure, a word that almost no one likes. But yeah, and but I'm putting myself in the, but I keep on thinking about this these days too, because if I was an emerging photographer today in Lebanon, I think that like there is no jobs in Lebanon today, so it would have been a completely different situation. And I feel like younger people today are, I don't know if it's because of the fact that capitalism is not working at this point, we're like in a dead end, but I feel like people are like new generations are really struggling today finding jobs. So like even if we are young, I think we are maybe old like for this. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Rahim, you mentioned earlier, you know, assignment work isn't going to necessarily sustain you financially in the long term, and you know that kind of allows you to resist it a little bit. But I'm curious, yeah, I mean, what's your experience in terms of wanting to generate a career, a kind of, you know, and support yourself through your photographic work, because you're at that stage where you're really starting to have the opportunities to maybe do that. Are there alternative ways that you've kind of managed to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and also to your previous question about thinking of, I think that the idea that agencies get you work is a pretty common misconception. Like I said, I did not go to school for photography, but I'm like very studied in photography. Like I'm very interested in the history of the medium as well as the particular canons that I feel connected to or inspired by. And so I think there is a need to be very well studied in what you're doing. If for the short time I was in school, I was studying sociology, and I think that that approach is more interesting to me than just like photo practitioner. But thinking about sustaining a career, I mean, the majority of it is in commercial campaigns, where you will actually be able to really sustain yourself. Because for me, the way that I work, like my shoots eat up all cost for like, like it's just like it's expensive to make pictures in the way that I do. So that's why I say that. I don't mean to sound cynical, and some magazines do have decent budgets, but it is not like life-changing money. It's like you might end up working 80 hours and making minimum wage if you broke it down to like what you're actually making on some of these assignments. But yeah, I mean, so I think, having a foot in multiple things, selling prints and having, but I think the thing that I'm leaving out here is that assignments are important for building the awareness around your work, and as well as your ability to be a good photographer. Like someone can come out with one book and you'd be like, okay, well, let's see what they do next. Like, are they a good photographer, or was this just a good project? And I think that there's a difference. And so I think that if you have a track record of doing well on multiple assignments, like to me, that is a test of like, okay, this person is actually like a visual force. They have something to offer. It's not just one subject matter, because then you'll have someone who is like, oh, loved their first book, but after that, like it was just subject matter based. Their work, they didn't really have much that they were offering. It was just, kind of one thing. And so that's something that I'm interested in, just as someone who like enjoys looking at photographs. Like I enjoy when someone has a strong big visual signature. And I think that assignments can be a great place to kind of allow that to take shape. Because, if you're this great photographer and you're working on this 10-year project and no one knows about it, it could come out and no one could care. That's the reality, and there's so many great projects that are like that. And so I think that for this idea of relevance, and we haven't even gotten into like the effect of social media on the medium, and yeah, there's so many factors at play. But I think of myself also as a business owner. Like my photography is also a business, and so there's things like strategy and marketing and PR, and I'm not like above being like, the idea of like consumer exhaustion and all of these things I factor in as like, a business owner, as like photography being my business. And, marketing, okay, well, what does marketing look like for a freelance photographer? And essentially, I think that assignments are in a form of marketing what you're able to do. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty disjointed, all over the place answer, but I think that I'm kind of giving you the context of how I think of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful also to think about that notion of kind of marketing, because I think a lot of people talk about the decline of mass media and the decline of print journalism and the decline of, assignment photography and all of those sorts of things. But I'm wondering if there's anything that's kind of replacing that. Is there an alternative? Are there other ways or means, or are we still as photographers dependent on those large media systems to kind of generate awareness of our work, or are there other ways to do that? I mean, Raheem, you said you were kind of quite resistant to social media. You don't want to use it too much and that sort of thing. But maybe Bika, you could talk a little bit about. I know you were saying earlier that you're starting to step away from kind of assignment work and commercial work and that sort of thing. How do you imagine sustaining that? Are there alternative ways that you might approach that, or do you just generate income elsewhere and feed that into your work?
Good question. I'm not. I don't have a strategy. Like maybe I should. Oh my God, it's but still, of course.
You're a business owner. Come on.
Yes, it's true, and I am actually, because I started to publish my own books.
Yeah.
but it becomes more of out of a frustration that we are that I don't want to compromise, and so I think I dare to take risks, and I'm lucky that people see that maybe I'm taking the risk and it's appreciated. Like, for example, with my latest book on Agatha, I think the way I wanted to publish it was very expensive, and publishers don't take the risk. So I can only take the risk myself, and I jumped on it and I did it, and it was thankfully seen by my audience, and I think my audience was on social media, although I don't have that many followers compared to many others, but still I think it's where I sold the book mostly.
Are there ways that any of you can think of generating an audience beyond kind of photo land, beyond photo world, that doesn't involve the mass media or kind of large international outlets?
I think it depends on the kind. I think it depends on the kind of work you're making. Like, I feel now with my show, I now have a show in Berlin, CO Berlin, and I feel that there's a lot of people coming there or interested in the work because some people send me messages or an email that have no photography, that are not the photography related background. And I'm very honored to get this kind of emails, that they are seeing the work, that they look at the work. And I think it depends on the places you're showing your work. And I think we shouldn't be only show the work in big museums and like in books that are very expensive. I think it's important to make work, like to show our work, to think about like how to show our work outside, you know, how can we, like, that it's for free, that it's more, that it's like you can make an expensive book, but how can you make this available for a wider audience? And like, how can we maybe do another print run that is cheaper, you know, or maybe people can download the book for free, or I don't know, there's like other ways we should think about like how to get our work out. And then this will generate a wider audience, I think.
Yeah. Miriam, do you have anything you'd like to touch on?
No, I was just thinking that for me, it's a dream to, like, the objective is to have like photographic work on the streets, like literally public spaces, and to everyone. Yeah.
And have you had any experiences of that? Have you had opportunities to show your work in kind of public contexts at all?
Actually, that was in, I forgot the name. It was I should not forget this kind of things. You were saying that you're a strategic person, Rahim. I saw Vika and I like being like so, like, oh no, we're not this kind of we're not strategic at all.
Yes, and I think that's just to personality type. I don't think there's a right way, because also like for some people it's about being more free and not having all that. It's just to your person. I don't think it's a right or wrong. That could work against me at some point. So.
Totally. But it was a collective exhibition in New York, Brooklyn, and Boston on bus shelters.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll get the name back. That's
and you found that rewarding, that experience?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But when I say the streets, I imagine something really like affordable and friendly, like posters. And,
Rahim, how about you? Have you kind of found, or have you experimented with any kind of alternative ways to market yourself or get your work out there? Or do you feel like mass media is the way to go, and so be it?
So my first book that I did that I spoke about, Oklahoma, it was self-published and horribly designed. So, you know, I'm not really like the presentation person. Like, I make the pictures, you know what I mean? And I sequence along with my publisher, but I'm also pretty like, once I make the photos, I'm not super precious in that way. Like I have to approve the final product, but I don't really think of myself as like wearing every hat. Like I'm not a designer, I'm not a curator, I'm not all of these things. Like I make photos and I'm pretty personal about all of them. So I have to be able to have someone that I work with that can look at the photos a little bit more objectively. And I know some people like who are like very purist, like they're gonna look at the photos on their studio wall for years and years before they sequence them themselves. But to me, I haven't worked that way in the past with working with Loose Joints, who published I Can't Stand to See You Cry, which was shortlisted along with Bika. We were able to be hanging out in Paris last year, which was a great honor to me, you know, because I'm such a major fan of her work, and you know, to be able to be in the same space even with this conversation, I also recognize that in the work that Bika, you have done, you know, before we were even like in the conversation. I just don't want to overly step my bounds in that way. So yeah, I just am like, you know, not to be self-deprecating, but I think there is a certain level of like respect, and that goes into how long you have been practicing and how you must evolve within this medium to remain, you know, I hate to say relevant because that's such a like a nasty word, but it's the truth of the art market. But what I would say also about how outside of like social media and things to garner like a platform, I think that photography, as I'm sure most industries are, but I think that photography has really shown me that it's very much like relationship based. And if you get along with people, like, you know, almost just as much as the work, you know, because it is such a small world. And, you know, so yeah, you know, taking time to get to know people. I didn't say this, but prior to becoming a working photographer, I was a lighting person. So I would do lighting for commercial photographers. And that was another way of like meeting editors and meeting potential clients. And yeah, I think that that's something that like not be lost. And then even with sometimes with the client, you know, never having like the mindset of like, oh, I'm only paid for this amount of time. Like I won't take on an assignment if that's going to be my approach. I really think that you have to be able to sit and speak with the client, because if not, it can become trivial. Like, and that's my thing. I always try to avoid is photography becoming trivial, where you're trying to like guess at what you're doing. I like to feel clear in what I'm doing and have a good idea of what I'm doing. And then it just becomes about executing, not like some very nuanced thing of like, oh, they might want this, but, and it becomes, like I said, just too many moving parts. And I think that sometimes going the extra mile to maybe have an extra level of Zoom talks, as exhausting as it is with editors or with the potential someone who's commissioning you, is, like I said, just gets back to like a relationship thing. And I think that that is going to go, it goes really far.
Yeah, I mean, that takes us on to one of the questions. I think we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anybody has them, please put them in the chat and they'll get sent to me. But there was one question that came up, which is really relevant to that, which was how did you as photographers go about building a network and connections in the photo world and the media industry? And I want to add on to that also, how do you maintain those relationships and sustain those relationships so that you actually have, you know, genuine relationships with these people that you're working with, and can kind of trust and collaborate, you know, build a network of people who you really can trust in terms of collaboration. Bika?
Actually, to what Rahim said, I find that very frustrating.
Yeah.
That I mean, maybe again, we like, I don't want I don't want my work there because I'm get along with this person, you know. And it's true, you see it, like if like you see it happening in front of you. And for me, it's more frustrating than I like it, you know. Like I don't want people to talk to me because I'm a magnum photographer, so they can, like, I don't know, like this is not how I want to look at people's work, and this is not how I want people to look at my work.
So how do you want people to look at your work?
Just say, but that's the problem, you know, like all those editors and creators, they receive so many emails. So how can they see your email? I want people to look at my work because they are interested in it, because they think it's confusing, or I don't know, they want to have a conversation about it. I don't know. This is how I prefer to look at my work. But I think that's the frustrating part, actually, that there's some network aspect there. And I really want to believe that it's possible without pushing yourself out there, and that it's possible. Like Miriam said, she's shy, and she's also like, I love her work. I didn't know her as a person, but I know her work. So I want to believe that it's possible this way as well. So I want to push for that more than like, yeah, I don't know if that's an answer to your question again.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
Miriam, how about you? How did you start to build connections and build relationships in photography with, being an introvert?
It's for me, it's very personal, and like all my approach is very personal. So, and this goes back to many things you mentioned during the call. For example, when you were saying how to say no to someone, sometimes I'm very unprofessional and I just don't answer when I want to say no. And also, this is something that makes me, because as you were saying, I'm a new nominee with Magnum, and it's the first time that there is someone between me and the person I am working with. So it's something I am discovering. But yeah, for me, everything is personal. And sometimes when it doesn't work, and it's only professional. And if not, sometimes I become friends with the people I work with. It's, yeah, I don't know if it's an answer, but
Yeah, no, that's fine.
yeah,
Yeah,
I just
go ahead.
For me, like photography and my work is like any other encounter in life. In the way I work, like in the approach of concerning everything, actually.
Yeah. But have any of you gone through the kind of like more contemporary traditional kind of approach of, doing portfolio reviews, entering competitions, all of that sort of thing as well?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Part of the game. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think you first, Miriam.
No, go ahead.
For me personally, because I didn't know people in the photography world at all, I entered a competition, Magnum Expression Awards, when I just graduated. And this is the way people saw my work in Magnum. So, and then they contacted me to present my work, to become a photographer in Magnum. So for me, it was extremely important. So I think you need to find a way that you feel good with for your work to be seen. And if it's for you to talk to people and then show your work or go to portfolio reviews, it's fine. Like Miriam's talking that she was showing her work on Facebook and social media. And if it's good, I hope it will be picked up. But you need to have it out there. And I think, as for advice, I didn't do it so much, but I think if I want like people to have attention, if I send an email, maybe it can help to like not only have text, but to have like one image in the email. So if people quickly go through their emails and they already see an image that they like, they're more likely going to read the email. So maybe that's some advice that could help for emerging for photographers to.
I agree completely with what you're saying, and maybe this is not gonna sound like an advice, but I did this, like I followed, I worked as I needed to. So, and as BK was saying, like I just published my images, and one thing led to another. So one encounter leads to something that leads to another encounter. And for me personally, I never was able to present myself, my work to clients like, hey, I want to work with you. I tried this at the beginning like twice, and it failed miserably. But it always works when people come to me for my images. Does that make, yeah. So
yeah. Raheem, how about you in terms of, I know you were saying you were assisting. When you were assisting, would you bring along pictures? Would you ask people if you could show them work? Were you, entering, and I know that you've entered work into competitions and that sort of thing, but were you going to portfolio reviews or just emailing your favorite photographers? What were you doing to kind of get your work out there?
Definitely wasn't showing pictures to people. I think that like especially when you get into like also no portfolio reviews. The first time I ever went to a formal portfolio review, I was a reviewer, and the very first person I reviewed started crying. So it was like a horrible experience. Like it was not my fault either, because like he was having a mental problem like that day, and it was just like a really rough setting that I was like, huh, how beneficial is this? And then I sat down with someone I looked up to and had them look at my work, and like my stomach was about to fall out, and I was like, I don't know if I love this. Um, but and then also, yeah, not like forcing photos down people's throats. Like sometimes you'll get into these like photo industry spaces and like you'll be around someone you really like. And I've learned it's better not to show them any pictures. Like if they're already like, it's like I said, it's just friendship. Like it's not like on a network like hobnob shit, because I also don't like most people, and I will in the industry there's a lot of like really weird celebrity characters and things like that, and people who are very like much like overtly capitalistic and got into art because they wanted to like wear Gucci and shit, like stuff like that. And I don't do well with those types, and so I know that like there's my people, and it's not about like pleasing everyone, but there is like an element of community to it that's not just about like work, like social climbing, because there is still hold a very high rigor to what work I enjoy and champion. But I just do believe in like just the idea of like friendships with having other artists who are peers who you can have conversations with, and it's not like, hey, I'm going to come to you with this very nuanced issue that I'm having, and then all they hear is you talking about an opportunity. Like another photographer, like I really hate that dynamic where it's like you can't talk about your experience because it's like seems like you're bragging about something, and you then can't get any like critical feedback because it's like, oh well, man, it sounds like a good problem to have. It's like a very like gaslighting experience to have. So having friends who you know that they're doing great in their own right, you can actually have a conversation about your experience without it becoming this kind of like trying to like see who's it's so odd to me, because to me I think that it should be one of the like least pretentious things. It's like we're making pictures, the community of people who enjoy them is also very small. Obviously I believe fully in that you spoke about access, but the reality of like when you go to these book fairs and you go to these like reviews, it's such a small group of people. So the idea of like having this kind of ego about it is just like almost funny to me. It's like, oh, we're not like a race car driver or like something that's like a super sick talent. It's like, you know what I mean? I think I love photography, but I'm just showing more the extreme of how I look at it and how like there should not be that much ego placed into it. But I really do believe in, and it's also something that like I learned from my grandfather who, was a big influence on me. When people spoke about him, they always just spoke about how he treated everybody the same. It didn't, because he was in the military and he was like high ranking, and how he didn't treat anybody from like in different ranks differently. And that's something that I also find really odd, when you can tell that people are transactionary in how they treat people. So if it's this person who could potentially provide them with this versus, and you really see those dynamics amplified in the portfolio review settings of like reviewer and attendee, and like these power dynamics that kind of get placed within photography. So I also think that it's really like one of my responsibilities as someone who has garnered like, some attention on my work, is to engage with younger artists who are especially artists of color, who have like kind of traditionally been like boxed out, of really being able to have your voice really kind of you know um, having your work like be taken seriously. And not like, like, oh yeah, well they needed that for diversity, or oh da da da, like, which that happens in the industry. But I think that there is something to be said about the timing of my ascension.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, there's a few questions that have come in, kind of picking up on something that I think Bika mentioned a lot earlier. But it's around, and I think it applies to all three of you, but it's the fact that you're all working with other people. Your subjects are quite often people. And I guess it's the question of within the context of not necessarily your personal work, but within assignments or commissions or work that you're publishing on in a kind of platform that's public. How do you approach that as a collaboration? How do you discuss that with your subjects? Are they paid? Are there model releases? All of those kinds of questions around that ethical kind of and the moral relationship that we touched on earlier between the photographer and the subject. Because maybe I could ask you to talk a little bit about that, because obviously Agata kind of is a project that's heavily collaborative.
Mm-hmm. Well, it really depends which kind of project it is. So, like, I don't know which direction you want me to go.
Okay, well, maybe let's talk about it because we're talking about assignments and commissions and that sort of thing. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you do deal with those issues and how you feel about publishing images of other people within a kind of in a way that you might profit from, in a sense.
Yes, I mean, I think I have a lot of thoughts about it, a lot of conflict about it, especially. Like if it's, for example, a fashion shoot, or if it's like a shoot to promote a phone or something like this, it's more easy because then you can go up to the person. And in my personal work, I don't work with model releases because I think I should do it probably, but I think it's really protecting the photographer more than it's protecting the subject, actually. So there's some things we can talk about too. But like with this, like if it's like a clearly defined brand or whatever, I think it's not that difficult. You can clearly go to the subject and talk about it and like say what you're doing, and that's fine. But if you're working for a charity or an NGO or something like this, for me it's like, or I got some assignments to photograph refugees, for example, who like young people who are living with families. Like then it becomes more complicated because the subject, like the people you're photographing, like you can ask for their consent, like you can ask them to sign like a model release, but do they really, like they just want help, like they say yes because there's like some like group often like me, a white girl coming into their house, like it's very intrusive first, and then second they want, like often you come from a charity that already helped him, so now I'm going to photograph you. So like how can they say no, like so this is really something I don't think I can do. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the clear answer as well. And because like how can you explain that it's maybe for, well, I don't know, it's very difficult situation.
Okay.
And I don't have really I don't know how to deal with it.
It's a very complicated, tangled kind of
and
I think that's why it's a relevant question, because I think many photographers have to deal with that on a in their work, and especially in one's personal work, you can kind of make certain excuses or kind of say I have complete control and power over these images and I can kind of protect the subjects as I see it. But when you're in a commercial or a media context, and then you lose that control a little bit.
And then let's say you have to deliver 20 images, and then of course you deliver them and you trust them, but then you never, like you can write a contract how they can use them, but still you cannot really control the context they are using. Like if they put it next to another image and the image you took is actually like it's the meaning how you intended to use, it's totally changing because they use another caption or they. So I think it's very important to have a good conversation with the people you're working with, and to have a good translator that is really able to explain those things to the people you photograph. Because I have been in situations that I thought everything was fine, but then I'm put in a situation that I have to translate myself, and my English is okay, but my French is not good enough to really explain, and try to be collaborative. Like even though if I want to be collaborative with the people, it's not possible because I don't have the language to do it. So, and so there's like many things that you have to talk through with the people you photograph, with the people you work with, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
Miriam, what's your experience in that regard? Because a lot of your work also is investigating people's very personal private lives and collaborating with them on that level as well.
I think it's a super important question that I've been asking myself a lot, especially since my work is becoming more and more collaborative. But I think it really depends on the situation. For example, when after the August 4 explosion in Lebanon, I worked with a lot of medias after, in the months following the explosion, and every time I would collaborate with someone, of course I couldn't pay from my pocket. Like I'm with all the people I was all the stories I was documenting. It's not like I have more money or anything, but there were we would always find a way to see depending on the person. For example, when Time published one portrait, they added at the end of the post, this person is raising funds for the LGBTQ plus community in Lebanon. Like, here is the link. And things like this. I would ask every person, like, what would you need in particular, and how could I help in my own ways? Yeah, so this is one situation, but it's a real question that I've been asking myself, like, even is actually, especially you were saying that when it comes to our personal projects, we can make excuses but for me, it's like, especially in this context that I am questioning myself, and I'm like, it's a collaboration. We're in this together. We're building the story together. And as photographers, like, it's not like we have big funds or we're not paid a lot, but we are paid. So how to like make this like balanced, or I don't know. And I still don't have an answer.
Yeah. Rahim, I mean, you were talking earlier about how important you feel it is for, you're representing a perspective, a voice, a community, a culture that hasn't necessarily been represented quite often within conventional media. But how do you negotiate that kind of relationship between the people that you're working with and the kind of public sphere that you're placing them within, and also to a certain extent, quote unquote, profiting from?
Yeah, I think that there's multiple, like as Bika said, there's multiple entry points to that. I can kind of talk through a few. So, I mean, as it currently stands, I haven't shown photographs really overtly of strangers, even though I photograph a lot of strangers, and that's projects that are forthcoming. So my work has mostly been of my own personal family, which has its own ethics to it. There's a photograph of my ailing father within my book that was recently shown in Arles, and it's like, what is the ethics of showing like my deceased father? What does that look like? But to me, I know what my intention is, and then it's a matter of time. How much time do I have here? Is there a right time to speak about this? And I mean, I know that for a lot of people who have also lost parents to ALS, like that photograph and that project in particular has really done something for them. And I believe in that. I don't set out to shift narratives. Like, I'm not, oh, my work is meant to change stereotypes. And no, like, that's not what I'm setting out to do. I'm expressing myself. And if that happens as a byproduct of that, then I'm completely happy. But that is not like my goal. Is not to change people's minds or to undo racism. Like, that is the wrong framework for making art to me. But with that being said, I also think that there's a weird thing with like the ethics of journalism that have like kind of kept the quote unquote subjects from the financial part of photography. That is, as you said, undeniable. So, if I'm working on a project where I am photographing someone and I'm making an appointment with them, like there's been times where I'll compensate them for their time. And that used to be a thing that you would hear like documentary photographers and journalists say is like the biggest like no, like, oh, you never pay a subject because then they're only allowing you to take the photo for money and this and that. And I just personally don't believe that. I also don't think you should be paying your subjects every time, because if it's a 15-minute interaction, it can create an odd dynamic between you. And also sometimes just knowing that this person having a professional photograph made of them, but my work doesn't really deal with like showing societal ills in a way that's overt. Like I'm not going into like an area to show you, look how bad it is here and how much like white America needs to care. Like, no, I'm just exemplifying the beauty that exists in this space. And maybe you should look at your version of community and realize what that has done to, yeah, mostly in particular, I'm talking about the Black American context, as in gentrification, white flight, and maybe think more about what you have done to inflict violence into these communities, but what you've also missed in that. Because for me personally, some of the most like tight knit bond communities have been under the most kind of like societal strife. Then I guess the last thing I'll say is in a commercial setting, typically like the photographer is getting paid sometimes up to like 80% more than the person in the picture. And so sometimes I myself have like tried to rectify that by giving part of my rate to the person in the photograph. Like if it's a friend and I'm like, oh, a company comes and they know you have access to that. When I'll hear what the person's making, like the, sitter of the portrait, I'll maybe give them a part of my rate. Or if there's a project that's an all-in fee and it's like, okay, all in, we're going to give you this amount of money to just create a body of work, I'll be like, okay, this amount is for the people in the pictures, and give them some of that. But also I try to keep in contact with people, give prints when I can. But I think at the end of it, it's just about being, intentional in what you're doing and being like researched in what you're doing. And also being open to criticism. Like I'm open to someone being like, yo, actually I felt misrepresented, that I wouldn't push against that. So I think all those elements happening at the same time are important. But yeah, there's also like the extremes of just like, yeah, you're an artist, it's like I said, I think it'd be different if I was making work that was about like very, very vulnerable things, but that's not really the nature of my work. I've never made photographs outside of the US. I don't really intend to. Never made work with language barriers except for commercial settings. And it's just, yeah, for me, I like would like to be able to, any person I photograph, like come and hang out with them again. Last thing I'll say is there's sometimes this belief that the people don't care about the photographs, that like you make a photograph of them and it's just no different than any snapshot that they've made. I've heard some people take that stance, and I also don't believe that. I think that I would hope that the person would like the picture that I'm making of them, and it's never a thing where it's like, oh, I don't want them to truly see what I'm doing here, which is sometimes with like a more speculative lens, you're maybe showing them in a way that maybe they don't want to be shown. And I don't really lean towards that direction either.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm being told that we're sadly kind of coming towards the end of our time, and I just want to thank all three of you really for your insight and your, what's really reassuring to me is obviously, as the discussion proved, this is a really complicated, crazy, difficult territory to navigate, and there's so many kind of there's so many issues that kind of raise. And what's really reassuring to me is that because you guys all represent kind of both the present and the future of photography, that how seriously and how you really wrestle with these issues, and how seriously you take them. And I think that is a testament to what's happening within photography, and also testament to all three of you as individuals, in a sense, and probably is part of the result of your success, because you really do take it to heart and think through these things. And I know it's difficult to have answers to some of these questions. Quite often it's better to generate more questions, to be honest, I think. So I really appreciate your insight and your help with this. And thank you so much for being a part of it. So yeah, if anybody wants to have a look at more work, just check these guys out, either through the Foam website or all other venues. Yeah, I appreciate it. I really appreciate your time and your contribution today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks for the questions and for inviting us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good assignment to come here.
Amelie, do you have any kind of final words?
Yes, I'm doing a final goodbye, and also, well, thanking Aaron, for an amazing job as a moderator. It was lovely that you did this talk and also the previous one. Anyone who got curious about part 1, it's on our YouTube channel. And if you want to rewatch this one, it will be uploaded as well. And well, thank you, Rahim, Bieke, Miriam. Great to have you here sharing your insights and also really showing your perspective. And thank you to all the audience members that you came and that you sat with us for 1.5 hours in a Zoom call. That's really amazing. And thanks to Nordin, the tech man in the background. And yeah, if you want to learn more, we have a last part in this series, which is an online course on collaborations, collectives, and copyright. And we actually going to have a even more practical conversation where there's also interaction possible. It's going to take place on 7th of September, but just check our socials to keep updated with it. And have a great evening, day, afternoon. Yeah, thanks a lot for joining.